Okay, so we are recording. Brilliant. So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining this call, and a very warm welcome to you, Jem. Big thanks to Evelyn for volunteering to be co-host for this call. So we invite you to connect and listen from a place of kindness, compassion, and curiosity. And respect for everybody's situation, however they may be reacting to our predicament. And everyone's invited to step into this space with a clear intention to recognize their experiences as their own. So this is not a place, obviously, for blaming other people or groups, or debating or arguing with each other. So it's really about a very special opportunity to ask Jem some questions and yeah, get his take on things. So just take a moment to reconnect with yourself after what might have been a very busy week. And notice how your breath fills up your body with life. And become aware of any tension in your body and allow this to just naturally dissolve. And with each breath, just take the opportunity to bring yourself more into the present moment. And just become aware of what it is that you bring with you as you arrive here. Great. So, Jem, I'm not going to use the precious time on this call to introduce you formally. Everybody on this call knows who you are and the contribution you've made and are still making. And we're extremely grateful to you for this call, but also, of course, for your courage in speaking your truth. Right from, July 2018, when you published your first paper. You've certainly had a profound influence on me, and I know many people on this call, so thank you. For everybody else on the call, please keep yourself muted, except when you're speaking, so as to keep background noise to a minimum. I have collected some questions from my community and kind of clustered them into some themes. So I will call on you by name if you've already kind of sent me your question, and then you will unmute yourself and come in and ask. Hopefully, if there's time, and this is a 90-minute call, there will be space for you at the end to ask a question that emerges from the conversation, kind of real time. If you have a question that hasn't already been explored, please send me or Evelyn a private message in the chat box. And as I say, if there's time, then we'll bring you in. So let's make a start. So Jem, I wanted to ask, I don't know if you think this is a kind of a light one to start off with, but what did you make of the recent BBC programme with Sir David Attenborough called Extinction? I was just really curious.
Yeah, thanks for asking, and hello everybody. And thanks for setting this up, Kimberly, and the invitation, and also your support for the Deep Adaptation forum and wider community. So yeah, David Attenborough's programme. My reaction was pleased because I got WhatsApps from, say, my dad about the state of the environment and climate, and that's unusual. So I recognise it has a place, particularly in British culture, for him to be talking about this. So I saw it. It was beautiful. It was painful, and for me, I expected the ending. the ending being basically, but there's still hope. What you need to do is change your personal consumption, and we need more collaboration across societies by experts to fix things like they did in the Virunga National Park. So it was, yeah, it was nothing new from mainstream television in terms of the implications of this predicament. But then I didn't expect David Attenborough on the BBC to call for a global revolution against capitalism, colonialism, patriarchy, and the root causes of our ecological crisis. So, yeah, that's what I thought we'd get.
Yeah, excellent, thank you. So we go to our first theme then, Jem, which is kind of all about engaging with the general public and the mainstream. And since publishing your paper in July 2018, the DA community and the movement has obviously grown rapidly, but it's still, of course, a tiny, tiny percentage of the general public. And so far, the movement has allowed people to kind of come to it rather than pushing messages into the mainstream. And I know for myself personally, this is one of the things that I most struggle with. And you have spoken out over the past 2 years, challenging this prevailing belief that if you tell people the truth, they'll lose hope, give up and get depressed. But what I wondered how that might be changing, and what's your view now about spreading this information more widely? Should we be doing this? What's the wisdom of that? And anything you've seen that we could bear in mind when we do?
Yeah. So definitely the strategy, my own strategy, once that paper went viral, was to then help people connect with each other who were reaching out to me. That was the origin of the Deep Adaptation Forum, and very much to say we don't have the answers. Let's just talk about these dilemmas in new ways, see what emerges. And it was therefore trying to provide a place where people could go who discovered this through word of mouth, through people forwarding the paper or telling their friends, or who had already come to this perspective themselves. Other people can join the dots for themselves, and have done before I did. So you're right. Back until now, so over the last 2 years, it's my aim has been to help people who already are ready to look at this, whether they consider that a societal collapse in their own lifetimes is inevitable or just probable, or whether they think it's already begun, to provide them a place to actually work together to help get things ready for when there's a wider awakening to that outlook. And yeah, I also, it was also because I didn't want to do it. I turned down TV stuff and a major publisher. I didn't want to be going around saying the end of the world is nigh, you know, that whole trope, that stereotype. But what's happened in the last few months is, because Deep Adaptation, through that sort of natural organic growth, has become annoying to sufficient numbers of people who work in mainstream, I call it sort of centrist reformist environmentalism, whether that's in NGOs or climatologists. It's become annoying for them, and for all kinds of reasons, and some of them quite deep in terms of aversion to difficult emotions, and wanting to feel in control, and wanting to feel that we can calm each other down. And so yes, a shift is being necessitated. The shift is happening, even if I didn't want to shift it myself, because suddenly people are criticizing Deep Adaptation in the mainstream, or more mainstream, like the Open Democracy website. And therefore, a range of people are wanting to correct misrepresentations or explain how Deep Adaptation has been a big part of their transformation and that they are a climate activist. They're trying to reduce their own carbon emissions, and they're trying to help people think about how to prepare for disruptions ahead, and they're trying to hold space for really difficult emotions, and they believe in the power of collective grieving. It's not mutually exclusive. So lots of people are now pushing back when the criticisms happen. So yes, there is a shift. Now the question becomes, does it make sense now to think about how to articulate more to more mainstream audiences, or any audiences at all, this outlook that a societal collapse within decades or even sooner, because of, but not only because of, but contributed to because of the ecological and climate disruption, is now probable or inevitable, or already started. Is that something to do, and if so, how? I have decided that it is the time, but we need to do it very carefully. We need to learn as we go, because I don't know if the support structures are there for people yet, because some people will hear this message understandably in ways where they might not just experience difficult emotions of shock, sadness, loss, grief, but without the necessary support, they might get stuck there. So all these difficult emotions are fine if they're flowing, but not if we get stuck in them. Now, I'm also conscious when saying that there's maybe a little bit of a paternalistic vibe in me, because this stuff will have to be gone through by everybody at some point. So who am I to say, let's delay it until we feel we've got the necessary support systems in communities, that the psychotherapists themselves have done their own inner work to be able to hold space for this eco distress. You know, it's just not going to maybe happen as in such an orderly fashion as that. So yes, I'm going to be communicating to the more mainstream. I've just finishing editing a book, and I will write my own book next year on this. And we've just hired a communications coordinator for the Deep Adaptation Forum to bring more attention to the diversity of positive, creative responses to people by people who have a certain level of collapse anticipation.
Brilliant. Yeah, so resonate with that. Thank you. So I want to bring in Kate now, Kate Swindles, with your question, Kate, about the term collapse. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Yep, have done. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, great.
Yep, great. Hi, Jem. Nice to meet you. So what's your rationale for continuing to stick with the term collapse? Has there been discussion in the DA community about reframing this if we're going to go out wider into the community right now?
So, so there's different ways that conversation can happen. Yes, I am sticking with societal collapse. I sometimes talk about societal disruption and collapse in order to connect with the current experience of people, you know, having disruption to their own life, whether it's through the pandemic and the response to the pandemic, or it's wildfires, or whether it's all sorts of problems, collapse of agriculture, being internally displaced, all manner of problems already upon us because of either the direct or indirect impacts or contributions of climate change. So sometimes I talk about societal disruption and collapse rather than just societal collapse. And the reason why I think it's helpful to continue to talk about collapse rather than, for example, just talking about disruption, or rather than, say, using the framing of breakdown, is both disruption and breakdown would imply that there's a possibility of the repair and restarting of what we currently experience as normal. And whereas a collapse suggests that what happens is it cannot then be reconstructed to what it was. Now that is closer to my understanding. and therefore I use it. However, I do realize that some people therefore think that it is some cataclysmic event, some point in the future, and they don't therefore interpret the current disruptions. So, for example, you can draw links between ecological degradation, habitat loss, and climate change. You can draw links between that and the increased prevalence and impact of coronaviruses on the human population. So you could see the current, say, for example, I'm here in Indonesia in a key tourist area. The economy has collapsed, and you could see that in the context of climate if you wish to see it that way. But yeah, I think I prefer to stick with the term for myself and then say it doesn't mean that it's some way off in the future and therefore it's not already occurring in some ways now. But there's a different point. There's a different thing, which is the Deep Adaptation Forum has over 100 volunteers and so many participants, and also a small core team and a governance group. And it's got a discussion group, which isn't very active at the moment now, on narrative and messaging. And people can decide to discuss this very question you raised, Kate, and what is the best way of framing the situation in order to serve our aims, which is to reduce harm and save what we can. So that would be a live discussion, and what's important is that people have that without any sense of deference to me. You know, they can all disagree, and I'll be the only one using the word collapse in the context of deep adaptation. That's fine and good. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I just wonder if we're going out more to the mainstream, if it just needs to be, like you're saying, you can talk about disruption at the same time, or perhaps stressing not necessarily abrupt collapse, or even transitioning into other things. Like like you say, you're in Indonesia now, you're not all going around starving to death right now. A system is collapsing, but it is transitioning into something else. Those are the kind of things I'm interested in trying to communicate, I think, to the people in our community.
Yeah, I hear you that some people who hear that people anticipate collapse therefore automatically assume that there's nothing to be done, or that we can't prepare to try and slow it down, or reduce its impact, or we can't begin to plan for relief as well in that context, or we can't discuss how do we regenerate from within that collapsing system, something else, something new. Some people do therefore not engage much, particularly if they can't see outside the current systems, or don't wish to. So quite a few people seem to think that when I'm talking about societal collapse, I'm therefore talking about human extinction, or the end. You know, a lot of people just talk about the end, and well, no, it's not the end, and I don't know how the human race is going to fare this century in terms of whether we survive as a species or not. So yeah, I hear you. There are some issues there, and maybe, and there are probably good arguments if the deep adaptation framework and approaches really is going to help people to deal with a radical change in normality, including also in their sense of identity and belonging and meaning and purpose. And if that disruption to their way of life is coming from something that doesn't seem like climate still, but the deep adaptation framework is useful and valid for them, then I can see some people will be saying, let's try and present it in a different way. Okay. That might happen. Everything can happen. I'm sticking with societal collapse at the moment in my work.
Great. Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Kate. Thanks, Jem. And I mean, maybe, Kate, it's time for you to get in there and make your voice heard even more in terms of the the views that you have. Fantastic. So we're going to move on now to what we might call engaging with corporates, businesses, politics, institutions. And let me bring Evelyn in with your question about business.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe just to sketch a bit where the question comes from is, I used to work in the corporate world, and I just noticed the difficulty, or you really want to support people and help people. I worked as a trainer and a facilitator. And then the feeling that people at the top have a certain responsibility to react to, you know, our current situation, and maybe not always taking the necessary action. So my question is about leadership and responsibility. I started wondering and reading about if the whole idea of corporations, if they really would understand deep adaptation, wouldn't it just be better for them to start dissolving themselves? So my question is very specifically for you, Jem. What is your experience with engaging business leaders in the deep adaptation discussion? Like, how successful has that been? What does it look like? And what are outcomes that you've seen in doing so?
So I haven't done it, and so my background includes looking at corporate responsibility, corporate sustainability, as an academic, but also working in NGOs and the UN on trying to promote more responsibility and sustainability practices from companies, and looking at creating incentives for that and the limitations of that. And I also worked as a corporate consultant, management consultant, on sustainability issues. So that was very much my background. But that was also why I felt cognitive dissonance in particularly sort of 2016, 2017, when I started to worry about where we're at with the climate crisis. And it's why I took a year off university, unpaid sabbatical, to look into all this. And yeah, my conclusion was then that it's too late for this system to be reformed. And therefore that includes stock markets, corporations, our non-reserve banking systems, you know, the whole thing. So because of that, I found it very difficult to think of why and how would I engage business leaders. So I didn't. I was more interested in engaging psychologists. I was more interested in talking to people who teach in schools and how would they think about this. I was more interested in learning from Buddhists on practices and philosophy. I just went with what I thought was really important to learn about for myself. So I have thought about it a bit in terms of businesses, and it's a massive agenda. So I'm not saying that nothing should be done in corporate engagement, but I'm quite daunted about how big an agenda it is. So on the one hand, there's an agenda which is, what do we need to see from the private sector to help slow down what's coming and reduce the harm, and organize for some better resilience and more relief in difficult situations. That would be a big conversation between people who work in the world of finance and people who work in the world of disaster risk management and risk recovery, disaster recovery, and such like. It's a massive topic. So that's like the structural, you know, what should be financed and what should not be financed to help. Then there's another piece, which is what's going to hasten collapse? Well, we have an incredibly vulnerable monetary system. where our ability to just go, you know, buy something at the local shop or buy something from a neighbor even, depends on international financial systems and financial markets. And so what could happen is, as more and more people wake up to what's coming and the amount of disruption, and there's various different disruptions, say, for example, to agriculture or all kinds of different sectors, as they occur, that could feed through into a financial crisis, which could actually then hasten the disruption to our daily life. So I think we need to look at that. We need to make our monetary systems more resilient. And that's a little bit of work I've been doing, and I'm going to publish a paper on that, probably in early November. So that's a second thing. But again, those are two at the big picture level. Then there's another thing, which is like your everyday manager, senior manager in a business of any kind. My first response would be, you know, my first response to somebody who's a corporate leader who's actually read into this and who for themselves thinks that societal collapse is now unavoidable, would be first and foremost to think as a person rather than as a professional business person. So it'd be like, okay, how do I help my employees and their families and their communities better prepare, rather than how do I help my business survive and grow in this disrupted future. So it'll be more about just how do you help the people that you, and the reason for that is that companies or organizations in general are key sites of social dialogue. I mean, a lot of people do not go to church now, or they're not involved in trade unions now. If you think ways that people used to have social dialogue, people used to know their neighbors so much more than they do now. All of that sort of decayed a lot. And so you have all these balkanized sort of camps of people on social media talking amongst themselves. Hello, everybody. But otherwise, you've got less general ongoing social dialogue. And so organizations could perform that function. So I've talked about, you could have assemblies of staff to look at this in organizations and say, well, what is it we can do to help? And it's a different level of conversation to the kind of climate adaptation policies and initiatives that are happening in organizations at the moment. At the moment, you'll have someone from estates who'll be talking about, well, we need to install more aircon, and we need to have more water fountains, and maybe we need to think about potential storm and flood damage, and maybe some more progressive people will think, oh, maybe we should turn the lawn into greenhouses. But there's not a real sort of, I'm not aware of large organizations who've actually brought their staff together and said, our way of life is now under threat. And so just as a responsible colleague and friend, I want to help you all also help me work out how do we help our community more. So it's a different kind of conversation. It's talking to people as people rather than just as staff. That would be where I would start from. But I haven't started it yet. So I've been off doing other stuff. But this is something I'm thinking I might re-engage with. Maybe definitely will be middle of next year, but I can't really beforehand.
Right.
By the way, just to say, there is a business group on the Deep Adaptation Forum, and there are people there who have said, I think there's a chap called Alex and others who have said that they are bringing the Deep Adaptation framework into organizations. Also, the Vice Chancellor of Winchester University, Joy Carter, was on my leadership course, and she's just written about it recently, and she believes that universities should really be taking deep adaptation seriously. And so therefore in her organization there'll be conversations about it, and she's encouraged, she has a role in the UK in a network of universities, so she'll be articulating that. It's still quite a taboo or marginal subject at the moment. People aren't used to talking about preparing in this kind of way.
Great. Thanks, Jem. Thanks, Evelyn. So I'm going to bring in Kate again with your question about politicians and political parties.
Sure, so this comes again from what me and Kim are trying to do in our local community, where best to go next, whether it's engaging with the community or with our local party, county, borough, and even at the sort of national level, because my MP here in St Albans is Daisy Cooper, who's just been voted the deputy leader of the Lib Dems. And she's also got a big environmental hat on, so we're going to try and engage with her a bit about this now. So I just want to understand your opinion on what value you see in engaging in political parties, and if so, which ones? I know you've been engaged with the Labour Party in the past.
Yeah. So being politically active is really important now more than ever, because as populations become more fearful and as they become less hopeful in terms of the old ways, you know, people used to expect their kids would have a better life than them. They used to think that if they worked hard and weren't unfortunate, then their lives would get better. And those sort of narratives have crumbled, and they're being replaced in many ways, but one of the main ways is narratives of blame. You know, blame people who don't look or sound like you. And it was predicted, you know, with the financial crisis in 2008, it was like, oh dear, what's going to come next? You know, we're going to have what happened in the 30s all over again. And it seems to be that we're seeing some of the same trends with the rise of extreme right politics and people in power you saying some of the same types of things. So it's very important to be involved in politics nationally and locally to work against that, kind of reactionary, populist. I'll offer you a lie which will help you feel safe and help you blame someone, so you let off some steam. I mean, that's basically what we're seeing with these. So yes, it's also important to be engaged in politics to try and get policies happening, even if it's not as bad as I say it is. You know, that's why I was involved in Extinction Rebellion. I mean, it's important to get governments to shift to an emergency footing on cutting down and drawing down carbon from the atmosphere, even if they won't start talking about adapting or working on adapting in a real serious sense, let alone preparing for massive societal disruption, breakdown, and even collapse. So I've said all that to prefix answering your question about if you anticipate collapse or anticipate further breakdown or further disruption, whether you anticipate that from climate or other factors. Is it good to engage in politics, and if so, nationally, locally, and how? And you also asked about my experience in politics. I was just remembering back to presenting to the Shadow Cabinet with Rupert Reed. We went in once to present for XR on that. It's difficult for politicians, really difficult. No, I think the deep adaptation agenda at this stage is best pursued through activism and local politics, not through national politics. I even think that national politicians talking about readying for collapse, wanting to try and reduce the speed and harm of a future collapse, will not help them be heard seriously. So it might be damaging to the people who are most truth focused and kind and leaderly. So I don't, as a former communications advisor to a leader of a national party during a general election campaign, I wouldn't advise to talk about this at national level in mainstream politics at the moment. But there's a lot that one could be doing anyway. So yeah, local government and also activism. I would like to see Greenpeace, Extinction Rebellion, and also Oxfam even, to be talking about how it is now the responsible thing to do to start planning for disruption to our way of life, and trying to make our communities more resilient and less vulnerable. So yeah, for example, what is Oxfam doing? What is Greenpeace doing to push for changes in the curriculum, for example, in European or North American countries, for example, so that young people can start learning skills which will help them if, you know, society begins to unravel and you can't just get everything from the supermarket anymore. But I would focus more on that rather than at this stage. I mean, politics typically needs to follow. I understand there'll be people who see it differently. They'll be looking at how the populist right seem to have no reticence about just making up shit in order to appeal to a gut instinct. So yeah, maybe I'm wrong in what I'm saying. I'm open-minded on that.
If I could just say, I mean, I've discussed this with Kim before, who for me, I have had good conversations with my county councillor who's on the resilience forum at county. So he's happy to sort of just start seeding things into the conversation. It's a Tory-led council that he's lived in. And that, I guess at this moment, it's just, I want them to be aware that there's this possibility, because so many of them still aren't. I just want to be able to look them in the eye and know that they know right now, and then maybe try and get them to give out those messages of being kind and, you know, the importance of community resilience. That's all kind of part of the mitigation anyway of community resilience and the transition. So getting them to be giving out those messages that overlap with what's already acceptable at the moment is what I'm thinking.
Yes. Yeah, the reason why I got excited with Corbyn and became a communications consultant for the duration of the 2017 general election was because he was restoring a moral discourse at the time to British politics in the mainstream. And then when I stopped working for him and them on election day, 2017. But that was I talked about it, how we needed some emergency socialism in order to sort of help people think about common cause rather than just market forces.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Kate. So let's move on to another theme, which is I guess you could call prioritizing our personal actions and behaviours. And I'm going to, in a moment, bring in Ashley to ask a question. But before that, I just want to read you a question, Jem, from Shannon, who I think she's it's 4 in the morning for her. So although she's committed, she's not that committed. And the question is, how do we decide which adaptation changes to prioritize? I feel like I'm so steeped in a lot of life-destroying systems, but I notice that often different domains in our life are so interconnected and feed into each other. What changes do you think have the most leverage now at the personal level? And then maybe maybe before you answer, Jem, let me bring in Ashley, who's got a similar question.
Hi, Jem. So as of the end of last week, I sort of pretty much gave up doing everything I'm currently doing as a business consultant, with a view towards just clearing down the decks and creating space for other things to come in. So within that space, currently in the system that we're still in as of today, I still need to earn money to live, to go to the shops, to exchange for other things, pay the mortgage, whatever else. So it was quite a practical question that what direction would you look in to earn a living that sort of feeds into trying to make the future a better place, understanding that it's going to change radically, societal collapse, however you want to phrase it. But you've already mentioned today that, perhaps we can make that decline less rapid. Perhaps we can be pointing towards how we're going to see our way through it. So it's quite it's quite a practical one. I need to earn money. I'd like to earn money doing something that I thought was making the future better. Where would you look?
Thank you, Ashley. And yeah, I'll come to that then. I'll start with the first question. And and Ashley's answered it as well, in that I did what you're doing it or have done, Ashley, which is we're all so busy. Got so much to do, working long hours. Okay, a lot of us aren't commuting as much as we used to, which is one benefit. But raising families, looking after elderly parents, all sorts, got so much to do. So to suddenly have new stuff to do on top of all that is difficult, particularly when the new stuff to look into in order to decide what to do is so challenging. So we risk, like I did, sidelining it, living in denial, getting on with life. So for me, the best thing was to get myself into a situation where I didn't have to work so hard. That's different for everybody. Some people have mortgages, some people have kids in private school, so different people have different obligations. But yeah, I managed to redesign my life, and I started planning to do that from 2017, so that I could live a life where I didn't have to earn so much money. And I went down to it's a 0.3, 30% contract with the university, and I live cheaply, and I'm also that's key. That really was key for me, to then have the freedom to think about what to do. What do I want to work on, spend my time on, learn about? So that's number one. Because only once you've done that can you then sort of allow bigger changes in your life, I think. So then, another part of that is I am absolutely not thinking of what I will be doing and how I'll be sustaining myself 10 years from now. That's kind of gone. So that might be foolish, but I kind of think that even if I'm around in 10 years, I'm 47, by the way, if I'm around in 10 years, then what I think offers me security won't be delivering me any security in 10 years' time. You know, like a nice house in a certain country, that might be a hellhole and there'll be no food and no peace and security. Or a load of money in the bank denominated in pounds or euros may be worth nothing. Or, you know, so I no longer have any sense of a reason for planning 10 years out. And so that also means that I'm more relaxed as well about my finances. I might be wrong. And it would be a nice, for me, I'm looking at it as, it'll be a nice problem to have in 10 years' time if I'm poor, but life is not awful. So there's that. And then Ashley, you were asking about what to do, what to work on. Wow, this is like we need I'm almost thinking like we need a modality here. We need can we have a facilitated group process? Can we all break off into 3s and 4s now and actually work through a group process where we actually help each other? We've got to learn a bit more I got to learn more about you, Ashley, to know what's your appetite. You know, we could use what's your skills, how much money do you need to earn? Yeah, and then we could use that Japanese thing with all the bubbles about, you know, what makes me happy, what do people need, what am I good at? Can't remember what the 4th one is. So I feel stuck in terms of, I don't want to give you silly answers. Was that a silly answer? Anyway, it's like we need a conversation. Should we break into groups and have that conversation?
Ashley, do you want to come back?
No, it's you've made me feel really good actually, because I've never had what a lot of people would call as a career, and things have tended to turn up and I've tended to do them. And over the past few years, I've lost a lot of that joy and freedom of doing that, and life became rather serious. And you know, some years and in certain times I've earned some quite big chunks of money, but I haven't been very sensible with what I've done with them. And so, you know, if you were talking about a normal retirement, I've planned really badly for it. But I'm sort of getting to the place where you are, where less and less I'm worrying, because I'm thinking, well, you know, what's a normal retirement going to look like in 10 years? Will it exist? And why not just get on with doing some stuff that I just really love doing now, but make that focus towards where we're going, you know? And one of those might just be scraping together what money we have got and going and opening an eco B&B in Scotland and learning how to live eco and get people come up and join us and spend a bit more time in nature. So
sounds wonderful.
So perhaps that's the way forward, you know, I'm not sure. But certainly advising businesses on selling more stuff is becoming less and less interesting. If there's any real interest in it at all for me, unless selling more stuff has some sort of positive bent on the future.
Actually, I was joking a bit earlier, but there is a whole field of life coaching and career transitions and all that. I remember there was a group called Escape the City, which was for bankers to rethink what they were doing in life and help them move into a different kind of work. I'm just realizing, yeah, maybe there needs to be a Escape the Apocalypse career and life guidance systems. I think it'd be brilliant. Sorry for the joke.
And then just in the chat box, we have, just to add to that, thank you, Ashley and Jem, listen to your heart. You know, Charles Eisenstein would say, whatever you're passionate about, do that, because everything's linked anyway. Somebody else says, buy Bitcoin. Somebody else, Jem's shaking his head there. Do feel free to comment on that, Jem, if you want. And then somebody else says, do some of the exercises by Joanna Macy about what you're called to do from the work that reconnects. So, yeah. Jem, anything on Bitcoin?
I just want to say, yeah, in terms of how do you find some monetary power or monetary security uh, at a time where fiat currencies might kind of evaporate, or mainstream banks might have real problems, then I would suggest looking for much more local credit networks. So I don't know quite where to recommend. There's an open credit network. I think if you go to lowimpact.org, you'll be able to click through to it. A colleague of mine who I'm writing the paper with about monetary adaptation, he's been working on the software systems for that. And so this is based on an idea of currencies aren't a thing that you own and therefore has value, but currency should merely be a technology for connecting people together to exchange things and produce things of real value. So fiat money, Bitcoin, or crypto, gold and silver, these are actually all forms of dead money, meaning they are so separate from real life. And the more that we focus on them and want to have them, the more we end up destroying real life. So I'm much more interested in a new paradigm of money, where money is much more connected to the things that we need in our lives: food, water, shelter, security, friendship.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for that. Let me bring in Erica with your question. If you unmute yourself, Erica.
Thanks, Kimberly. I mean, it sort of follows on, and particularly follows on from some of the comments in the chat box, which is, again, this question about, well, what can we as individuals do in the face of all of this? And I'm curious as to whether, given how interconnected everything is, how entangled, the natural world is, and all the different crises are, we don't really know what's going to happen next, or what sequence of events will lead to a collapse. And also, given that we can't, we never can, but particularly in that context, anticipate the impact of our actions, is there any point in doing anything else but just follow our heart, do what calls to us, as long as you're acting from that place of kindness and compassion and doing something constructive, whatever it may be, that's kind of our job to do. That's all that we can do.
Yes, Erica. Here. The only caveat I would put on that is some people, when they hear people that they consider have some privilege talking about responding to our predicament with kindness, compassion, love, and so forth, they worry that we might end up focusing on pleasing ourselves. So we might not be acting in as much solidarity as we could with the people who are already suffering right now because of the systems as they are, and as when the systems and the people in them get more stressed and more violent. So I've heard calls for me to talk about, within the context of being compassionate, being kind, being wise, being loving, thinking about the difficult question of our complicity in ongoing destruction and oppression, and thinking about how we can be more accountable, more responsive to the people who are suffering in the current systems, and that to keep that in mind, and that we can't just satisfy ourselves about that. What it means is, or what it invites of us, is to have more conversations and listen more to people who might make us feel, wouldn't make us feel, but we might feel more uncomfortable listening to them. If they say, Yeah, Jem, that's just you and your white middle-class male privilege talking about being loving and kind in the face of this predicament. That might be a bit awkward for me to hear, but I need to hear it and I need to think about how I respond to that. It doesn't challenge the framework, it just invites a little bit more rigor about what the hell do we really mean when we talk about being loving.
Erica?
Yes, absolutely. And I do think that it is quite important to come at this from a place of self-knowledge and of groundedness and of understanding what has influenced, you know, who we are and where we are, and certainly, absolutely, you know, recognizing our privilege in the world. I mean, that is fundamental. And I also would want to guard against, because I do see this, and I've seen it a bit in myself around the Black Lives Matter business, is not to kind of get too caught up either in beating ourselves up with a large stick, because that equally can be as paralyzing, you know, as some people think that, you know, facing collapse could be. So I think that it's about being okay with just doing your best to be as aware and as informed and as humble as you can be, but not using any of that as an excuse for inaction.
Yes, I completely agree with everything you just said at the end there. The one thing I would wonder about is that the beating ourselves up about, and I think it's important when you engage in questions of social justice, racial justice, gender justice, to not be focused on and driven by beating each other up about mistakes in language and framing and behavior and such like. But then again, I think I don't, if one experiences observing one's own assumptions, habits, prioritizing or deprioritizing of things, if one observes that and thinks, oh, okay, that might be because of my privilege, and one hears that and hears something uncomfortable about that, that's okay. That, you know, we can all keep changing. We can all keep adjusting and evolving. I have been. So yeah, I hear what you say about how it might be paralyzing. But I would need to see more examples of how it's paralyzing. Because at the moment I'm experiencing challenges to my privilege as liberating, not as paralyzing. But yeah, I'm open to hearing that other people are finding it paralyzing.
I think you're probably right in what you said about, you know, it's the fear of, you know, using the wrong word, you know, because we have, you know, unwittingly been part of a system where we, you know, we have been insensitive in how we see things or how we express things. But the potential is there to, you know, out of fear of getting it wrong, you know, to just retreat and say, well, you know, I can't possibly get this right. And that's not helpful. It is about, as you say, it is about looking at it from a liberating point of view and being okay with making mistakes and being okay with, you know, just doing better.
Yeah, absolutely. And so two concepts come to mind. Extinction Rebellion are now going to be looking at co-liberation. Skeena Rathor, who I know quite well, is leading on that at the moment. And so that's I think in that is approaching it in the way you've just described, and also a sort of a call-in culture rather than a call-out culture. So, hey, have you heard? There's an even better way of talking about this, and and seeing it in a generative, positive way, we have an opportunity to evolve and change. And for me, it is part of the deep adaptation framework. It's in the reconciliation piece, as we approach incredibly difficult times, if we recognize how much destruction caused, as we seek to learn about why that happened, then there's a lot of healing to be done and that can be done, and that's an opportunity. And healing around race and gender is part of that.
Yeah, yes, I'm becoming familiar with Skeena's work, and I find the co-liberation idea is quite liberating and constructive around, you know, working together on all of this rather than making a particular group of people the baddies. Great, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks very much, Erica. Yeah, and actually Ellie's just written an interesting thing in the chat box of about one of the fundamental things missing in our education system is that it's okay to make mistakes and to learn to forgive and ask for forgiveness. And I know that you've spoken before, Jem, about education generally. Any kind of just thoughts or observations about that, about, you know, how you would influence the curriculum if you could, or whether there should even be a curriculum?
Currently, I am told by people who are either school teachers or work or have worked in supporting and training school teachers in the UK, but it sounds like it's an ideology that's in many countries, that children are being taught at school from the earliest age that there is a right and wrong answer, and they need to know it and shouldn't really talk much, if at all, until they think they know what the right answer is. And there's and these, you know, this is like the meta level of learning, which it doesn't matter what the content is. If people are experiencing their socialization as they grow up like that, then that's problematic. And I've heard teachers who are shocked, and I've heard summer school teachers who just like only see school kids once a year, shocked at how over the last 10 years they've seen a shift towards more reticence about just being curious and intellectually playing, shall we say. So there's, I think that needs to change. And I know there's some mindfulness work in schools, but that is also, I mean, I can't imagine what kind of human I would have been if I had been introduced to basic concepts and practices of mindfulness when I was younger. That will be very helpful to help young people. Also to help because there's going to be a lot of young people who understandably will blame the generations that are represented in this Zoom call today. And blame can be galvanizing for a group. It can bring them together because they've got an other to you know, to feel connected, that they hate them. But then it's a horrible thing to live with, to have that blame, hatred, non-forgiveness. And it doesn't lead to very good decisions for oneself or anyone. So helping young people explore emotions, express emotions, recognize their anger at their parents' generations and grandparents' generations for that this has happened, but then to process that and not act, not from that, not live their lives with that as either a conscious or a subconscious force in their life. That would be really important. and not just for them. It'll be important for us, so that, you know, I don't get involuntarily euthanized for having used up my carbon budget in 10 years.
Yes, well, I hope not. And just to get a quick plug in for the 3 principles, as well as mindfulness, there's now a large and rapidly growing number of people going into schools, sharing the 3 principles with kids as well, with great effect, focusing on resilience. So yeah.
I can see the strong connections with mindfulness there, in terms of mind states and observing thoughts, and choosing how one responds to external stimuli, and so seeing where one puts one attention, and
Yeah.
how does one make meaning. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And also sharing with all sorts of people that resilience, I think this is where it's most different from mindfulness, doesn't have to be built like a muscle. It's actually innate. Once we understand, you know, the only thing getting in the way of it is our own thinking. And when people start to see through that, we fall back into that natural resilience. Yeah.
I see. Yeah, yeah. This sort of faith in human nature and the original wisdom that we all, or deeper wisdom we've all got.
Absolutely.
The shadow side would be only if that leads young people not to be politically engaged, active, and revolutionary, rather than just thinking they just need to better cope with their stresses.
Yeah.
So if it can be complemented by conversations about how to create change at scale.
Yes, yes, no, I agree, absolutely. Okay, well, this is just wonderful. Evelyn, I wanted to bring you in now about with the children question, if that's okay.
Yeah, the children question. Yeah, I'm smiling a bit because this morning I read I buy the Big Issue regularly, and I just discovered in the Big Issue that David Attenborough is a patron for population matters. I wasn't aware. And I was quite surprised, because when I talk about the topic of population and children with people, I notice it's such a sensitive topic. And for me personally, the whole waking up to the predicament we're in really raises the question of whether or not to have children. For me currently, the answer would be no. But I'm very curious, Jem, where do you stand on it? You know, your thoughts on whether or not to have children.
So yeah, there's 2 different issues. One is population in general, and whether actively working to reduce population growth globally, or even just within one country, is sensible, both for mitigation and preparation for disruption. And then there's the other issue then of a quite different issue, I think, of, although it relates, about oneself and whether one wants children. And it's different because then the second question becomes one of, how do I feel about bringing life into this world with the perspective that I have that it's going to be so difficult? And am I creating huge amounts of future pain for myself as a parent, as that child grows up to learn about the world that they're entering? And then as those questions arise at some point in future, which could be like, why did you have me with what you knew? And that might be theoretical, but it might be in an extremely mutually difficult situation for oneself and one's child. And so that's the second part. So, and some people, so I vacillate on this one. So I'm going to talk about, not going to talk about global population growth, I'll come back to that, but on the personal one, I vacillate on it. Because how many years we live is not the does not correlate with the importance or the worth of a life experience. You know, obviously, if I had I'm not a father. If I had a child, I would want them to live a long, happy life. But if I had a child and they had 10 years that was amazing, then it requires a bit of a materialistic view about why that wouldn't be wonderful in and of itself in its own unique way. And I haven't talked to parents who've lost their children at, say, the age of 10 or before adulthood, basically. But I presume they would have wanted them to, of course, wanted them to live on, but at the same time, they would see that they wouldn't want it another way, in terms of they would want that child to have experienced life. So I'm saying that it's a very difficult question, and some people say to me, Jem, no, you put your faith in life, even if the child will only live to 10 or 20 or 70, whatever. Just put your faith in life, and then there's often that idea, well, you won't know. You know, they might, who knows, you know, your 14-year-old son, as you're both starving to death, might say, thank you, Dad, for having me. This has been an amazing time. You just don't know. You can't let your pain aversion, future pain aversion, restrict life. However, there's also the other side of the question, which is it a selfish act if you live in the West and you know the normal carbon and ecological footprint of a Western human being to have a child right now? And yeah, it does seem to be. It really does. But there's an answer to that as well, which is go and live somewhere where you live off the land and you know, try and have a super low carbon lifestyle. So yeah, it's my ex-partner and I decided we would not have children, having gone through all that thinking. Sorry, it's a bit late here. So global population growth, it's a problem, and also the way that we talk about it is a problem. The best way to curb global population growth is education for women and for girls and for women, and reproductive rights for women, and it means therefore also looking at reactionary religious movements as well, and all sorts. How can you be partners to women in various parts of the world to support them in promoting more gender equality and rights? That is simply the best way. It's been proven. So rather than anything else, that's the way. But then, of course, doing something to say have a little bit of an impact on population growth in India or somewhere is nothing when compared to the amount of consumption and pollution associated with people living in the rich West. So there needs to be a sense of proportion. So at a minimum, I think we should push back against any economic system which requires growth, and any narrative from any politician that says we want to boost the birth rate in the name of the thriving country and economy. Yeah. And on population, I believe in very regulated, voluntary assisted dying. And I think it is completely bloody disgusting that so many people have so much pain for so many months or even years because they don't have the choice of regulated voluntary assisted dying. And then they have the problem of not really wanting to involve their kids if they decide they want to go to Switzerland because they don't want to get their kids into trouble and all that. It's which means you have some people dying on their own in Switzerland rather than with their kids, or there's that sense of worry. So I think this population concern, if you look at it, I would back more people to become advocates of regulated voluntary assisted dying rather than advocates of population control in the third world. It would be more coherent for me if we're actually looking at it that way.
Right.
And I presume most of you on the call know a relative who went on living for at least weeks, but probably months beyond where they wanted to. So this is not just an abstract idea, and we face this possibly, some of us, depending on how long society continues. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Jem, I just have one more question. I wondered if you felt it was still relevant to share your picture or not.
Yeah, okay. I'll before you do the screen share, I'll just say why.
Okay.
As deep adaptation has become more well known, as more people anticipate collapse and tell their friends and colleagues or tweet about it, more people are becoming annoyed with that and troubled by it. And rather than engaging in the conversation, they try to shut it down. I feel that's unfortunate because it means we lose time. We lose time to openly explore, what does this mean? What can we do about it? Yeah, so what I tend to, I am going to do a bit more work on this. It doesn't feel like my most favorite thing to do in the current situation, to actually spend loads of time looking at collapse risks and how society will break down, but I am going to be doing more work on that. But one of the simplest things, if you have these conversations and people respond to you in that way, I think this graph, Kimberly, if you share it, what we're seeing is that this graph is from a chap whose surname is Housefather. And he works in the Breakthrough Institute and also with Carbon Brief. And he's done these simplified emissions pathways. And these climate targets are based on the conservative consensus science published by the IPCC. So there's this is certainly not the radical or outlier or worst case scenario science. And the worst case scenario science has generally front run and the IPCC, and the IPCC plays catch up. So this is a conservative view. So there you go. That's how carbon emissions have climbed. And now, if we want to have a 50% chance of staying under 1.5 degrees, the blue line, from this moment forth, that's how much we need to cut for a 50% chance of staying under 1.5 degrees. And 1.5 degrees, according to some studies, does cause agricultural collapse. Not all studies, but some studies does, particularly those that are including variability and also looking at how the jet stream in the Northern Hemisphere gets blocked and causes all manner of problems with droughts and floods, particularly to the main grain producing areas in the Northern Hemisphere. So what happens is people who want to keep a hope of daily life as normal and reforming the current system, they say the burden of proof is on me in saying we're not going to follow that blue line, rather than thinking the burden of proof is on them to show us how we are going to be following that blue line. And for me, I think it's a more responsible approach to say, well, what if we won't follow that blue line? Yeah, so that's why I really think it's important to have these conversations, even though to do so, we're floundering. This is the most difficult thing to talk about. We're in a completely new situation, and it's full of pain, and so often we want to find ways of numbing or escaping that pain. And there are many ways on offer to us, but I think therefore one of the greatest capacities we can develop is to notice that the pain is just emotional pain of all sorts, fear, anger, all sorts, is an aspect of being alive, and to not be averse to it and not act from it, but to be able to notice it. And my fear, my sadness, my confusion, my uncertainty is in some form going to be with me for the rest of my life. And some aversion to all those emotions will be with me for the rest of my life. And that's okay. And we can develop ways of being more okay with those difficult emotions and with our aversion to those difficult emotions. And we can develop more ways of coping when things feel like they're getting too much, or we feel like we're getting stuck in those emotions. And we can develop more ways of returning to that sense of faith that there is meaning. And we can return to that sense of love for just having lived and being alive right now, in life in its amazingness. And we can return to moments of just pure joy. But it doesn't mean we can do all that without kind of thinking that we have to arrive at a place where we don't have difficult emotions anymore, or we don't have our aversion to the difficult emotions anymore.
Beautiful. Yeah, one of my biggest insights is around that, in this last year, that everything that's that I find gives life meaning is still here, is still possible, and whatever happens. So my last question, and you've already gone some way to answering it, I think, but my last question was going to be about the dreaded word hope, and I know that can easily become hopium and an avoidance of those pain avoidance. And I quite like Debo Zarko's framing that hope is often just denial in drag. But as we sit here now, what, if anything, are you personally hoping for?
So I have sort of like micro hopes. I hope I'm going to get fit and eat better and meditate more and learn more songs on guitar in the next few months. I suppose if I hope and I haven't got a proper plan, then that's just I'm doing something. What is it? Denial. I'm denying that I'm not actually going to lose the belly. Not going to learn more songs. So I got the micro hopes. I've also got micro professional hopes. I really hope that the new team that's at the Deep Adaptation Forum do well, and that we get a little bit more money. Obviously, we've been helped with wonderful individual donations from people, and that's super welcome. I'm moving on from that now, so I have my hope around that. I believe in what they're doing. But then, if we step back and look at the society and humanity, yeah, the things I believe in so much, I think are dishonored by using the concept of hope. So I do not want to say, I hope more people will find the divine and make that the starting point for every day of their lives. It's to say I hope for that. It's like, well, that's going to happen for some people. It's certainly not going to happen for other people. Or it's going to happen to some people sometimes and then not other times. And to say I hope for that is, it's like I'm giving up to me right now, that feels like I'm just passing the buck. I intend to do my little bit to help validate people's curiosity about the divine and it being an everyday practical thing. And it's simple. It's about living life from love and curiosity and connection. And I'm going to do my bit on that, no matter what's happening. And no matter, to say I hope that that's what happens for everyone is just, it's just trite nonsense. I mean, no, I am going to try and do my bit to live that way and help other people live that way. And I have no idea whether that's going to do anything at scale for society in the end. I don't know. I can tell stories about whether it does, but that feels like I'm just pretending.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, Jem, it's just been such a rich conversation, and I so appreciate it, and you and the whole team. So thank you very much. And we've run out of time, sadly, but I will be putting the recording up. So does everybody want to unmute themselves and just say goodbye? Thank you so much, Jem.
Thanks, Jem.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you want more of me,
Everyone. Thank you.
I'll just say, I'm terrible at marketing, so I never think if you want more of me, there's a few more courses on my places on my online course in November. But I'll send you a link, Kimberly, and you can put it underneath the video.
Definitely. Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Cheers, Kim. Thanks, Evelyn. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Kim.
Bye.